The deep space probe disappeared without a trace. One moment it was transmitting data from beyond Pluto's orbit. The next moment there was nothing but empty static. Dr. Emily Watson stared at her computer screen in the control room of the Arecibo Deep Space Array, trying to understand what had happened. 3 years of preparation, millions of dollars, and humanity's first faster-than-light probe had just vanished. "Run the telemetry again," she told her assistant, Mark Chen. But they both knew the results would be the same. The probe had encountered something at the edge of their solar system, something that had swallowed it completely. 24 hours later, the discovery changed everything. The probe hadn't been destroyed. It had been stopped. Satellite telescopes around Earth began detecting massive structures in the outer solar system, perfectly positioned in a sphere around the sun. They were beautiful and terrifying, crystalline formations that pulsed with their own light, each one the size of a small city. Admiral Robert Kane received the briefing in his office at the Pentagon. The military had taken over the investigation as soon as they realized the implications. Earth was surrounded. Someone or something had built a cage around their entire solar system, and humanity had been too primitive to notice until now. "How long have they been there?" Kane asked the scientist, presenting the data. "Unknown, sir. Could be decades, could be centuries. They're made of materials we don't recognize, and they're clearly artificial. But here's the strange part. They're not doing anything hostile. They're just watching." Kane stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the planets, alien sentinels kept guard over Earth. The question was why. The answer came 2 weeks later when humanity launched its first manned mission to investigate the Watchers. The UES Defiance, Earth's newest and most advanced spacecraft, approached the nearest crystalline structure with a crew of 12 volunteers. They were prepared for anything: weapons, shields, first contact protocols. What they weren't prepared for was the voice that suddenly filled their minds. "Young ones of the third planet," it said, gentle but impossibly ancient, "you must not pass. The covenant of silence protects all. Return to your world. Grow in wisdom. In time, perhaps you will understand." The communication wasn't radio or any form of technology humans recognized. It spoke directly into their thoughts, calm and patient like a teacher explaining something to children. Commander Lisa Park, leading the mission, tried to respond through normal channels. "This is Commander Park of the United Earth Navy. We come in peace. We wish to explore beyond our solar system." The response came immediately, tinged with what sounded like sadness. "There is no passage, young ones. The galaxy bleeds too easily. We have seen what expansion brings: war, genocide, the silence of extinction. Return now and live in peace." But humans had never been good at accepting restrictions, especially when they came from outsiders. Word of the alien blockade spread across Earth within hours. Some people panicked, others demanded military action, but most simply felt angry. Humanity had spent 50 years developing faster-than-light travel, had united their fractured world under the dream of reaching the stars, only to discover they were prisoners in their own solar system. The beings called themselves the Drakmari, and they were ancient beyond human comprehension. For 3,000 years, they had maintained the Covenant of Silence, a treaty that bound over 200 species to their home systems. No expansion, no conquest, no contact between worlds. It was the price of peace in a galaxy that had once burned with endless wars. "We are the Watchers," their representative explained to the emergency session of the United Nations. "We require no food, no rest, no companionship. We exist to maintain the barriers, to ensure that the young races do not repeat the mistakes of the old." Secretary General Maria Santos asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What gives you the right to imprison entire species?" "The right of survival," came the reply. We are the last remnant of the Fourth Galactic Empire. We watched our civilization tear itself apart in wars that consumed solar systems. We will not allow such destruction to happen again. The debate raged for months. Religious leaders declared the aliens either demons or angels. Scientists begged for more information about galactic history. Politicians demanded Earth's sovereignty be respected, but the Drakmari remained unmoved. The barriers would stay in place. That's when Admiral Kane made his decision. He had studied the sensor readings of the crystalline watchers, analyzed their positions and defensive capabilities. More importantly, he had studied human history. Every great achievement had come from someone willing to break the rules that others accepted. The military buildup began in secret. 12 ships, humanity's entire deep space fleet, were modified for combat. New weapons were developed, tactics were planned, crews were trained. The world's governments officially condemned the project, but privately they funded it. If humanity was going to break free, they would need every advantage they could get. 6 months later, Kane's fleet approached the alien barrier for the second time. But this wasn't a peaceful exploration mission. The ships spread into battle formation, their weapons powered and ready. The Drakmari watchers detected the hostile intent immediately. "Young ones, do not force us to act. Your weapons cannot harm us, and violence will only bring sorrow. Please return to your world and live in peace." Kane opened communications to all ships in his fleet. For 3,000 years, these beings have kept the galaxy in cages. They call it peace, but it's really just another form of death. Today we prove that some things are worth fighting for. All ships, prepare to engage. The crystalline watchers pulsed brighter as they detected the human fleet's intentions. For the first time in millennia, their perfect peace was about to be challenged. They had dealt with aggressive species before, had gently but firmly turned back every attempt to break through their barriers, but they had never faced humans before. They had never encountered a species that had spent its entire history learning how to fight impossible odds and win. The Drakmari were about to discover that some cages were meant to be broken and some spirits could never be contained. As Kane's fleet began its attack run, the first shots of a galactic revolution echoed across the void. The age of silence was ending, and the age of humanity was about to begin. The first nuclear missiles struck the crystalline watcher at exactly 1432 Earth Standard Time. The explosion bloomed like a small sun against the alien structure, and for a moment everyone held their breath. When the light faded, the Drakmari Guardian remained untouched, its crystal surfaces reflecting the distant stars as if nothing had happened. "Direct hit. No damage," reported Weapons Officer Lieutenant James Rodriguez from the UES Thunderbolt. His voice carried the disappointment that everyone in the human fleet was feeling. Their most powerful weapons seemed useless against the alien watchers. But Admiral Kane had expected this. The attack wasn't meant to destroy the Drakmari. It was meant to learn about them. Already, his sensors were analyzing the energy patterns from the explosion, studying how the aliens had absorbed and redirected the blast. "All ships switch to electronic warfare packages," Kane ordered. "Let's see how they handle something they can't just bounce off their shields." The second wave of the attack was invisible to the naked eye, but far more effective. Instead of explosive warheads, the human ships launched clouds of metallic chaff and powerful electromagnetic pulse generators. The effect on the crystalline watchers was immediate and dramatic. The perfect coordination between the alien guardians began to break down. Their synchronized pulsing became erratic. Their formation started to drift apart. The Drakmari communicated through some kind of crystal-based network, and the human jamming was disrupting their ability to work together. Watcher Prime Thranon felt something he had not experienced in 2,000 years. Confusion. The emotional resonance from the human ships was unlike anything the Drakmari had encountered. Where other species radiated fear or resignation when faced with the barrier, These creatures burned with something fierce and unstoppable. "The young ones fight with strange methods," pulsed Sub-Watcher Kelrus through the disrupted crystal network. "They do not seek to destroy us, but to blind us to each other." "Impossible," replied Threnon, though uncertainty crept into his mental voice. "No species has ever developed such tactics. The Covenant has prevented warfare for 3 millennia. But that was exactly the problem. While the galaxy's civilizations had spent 3,000 years in enforced peace, humans had never stopped fighting. Every conflict on Earth had taught them new lessons about combat, new ways to overcome superior enemies, new methods to turn weakness into strength. The UES Raptor, piloted by Commander David Torres, dove through the Drakmari formation like a hunting falcon. His ship was tiny compared to the crystalline Watchers, but its size was an advantage. The alien weapons were designed to stop fleets, not dogfight with individual vessels darting between their formations. "I'm reading massive energy buildup in the barrier itself," Torres reported as he deployed another wave of electronic countermeasures. "I think they're trying to reinforce it." Kane smiled grimly as he watched the tactical display. The Drakmari were doing exactly what he had hoped. They were focusing all their attention on maintaining their precious barrier instead of dealing with the ships attacking them. It was a defensive mindset that humans had learned to exploit thousands of years ago. "All ships, converge on grid reference 77 Mark III, Kane commanded. "We punch through together or we go down swinging. 12 human ships representing everything Earth could spare for this desperate mission focused their fire on a single point in the alien barrier. The concentrated assault of nuclear missiles, kinetic rounds, and electromagnetic warfare hit the energy field simultaneously. For a moment, nothing happened. The barrier absorbed the attack just as it had absorbed everything else for 3,000 years. But then hairline cracks began to appear in the perfect sphere of energy surrounding Earth's solar system. The Drakmari Watchers reeled as their ancient barrier began to fail. Threnon felt panic spreading through the crystal network, an emotion. His species had almost forgotten during their long vigil. In 3 millennia, no species had ever broken through the Covenant's protection. "Seal the breach!" Threnon commanded desperately. "Pour all energy into the barrier matrix." But the humans weren't finished. As the Drakmari concentrated on repairing their barrier, Kane launched the final phase of his attack. The UES Defiance, his flagship, accelerated directly toward the crack in the energy field. It was a move so reckless that no sane species would attempt it, flying a ship through a collapsing energy barrier that could vaporize them instantly. "Admiral, the stress." "Readings are off the charts," reported his engineering officer. "The ship won't survive passage through an unstable barrier." "Then we better make sure it's not unstable when we get there," Kane replied calmly. He opened communications to the entire fleet. "All remaining ships continue jamming. Whatever happens, keep those Watchers confused until we're through." The Defiance hit the crack in the barrier at maximum speed. For a terrifying moment, the ship was surrounded by crackling energy that lit up every surface. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel as systems overloaded and hull plating began to buckle. Then, they were through. Admiral Kane stood on his bridge, looking out at stars that no human had ever seen before. Behind them, the barrier reformed, but it was too late. The impossible had become reality. Humanity had broken the chains that bound them to their solar system, but their victory came at a cost. The UES Lightning had been caught in the barrier's collapse and was gone, taking 37 crew members with it. The other ships had suffered damage and casualties, and across the galaxy, other species were detecting the impossible. The covenant of silence was breaking. Emergency signals flashed between worlds as the news spread. The barriers around dozens of solar systems began to flicker and fail. Species that had been trapped for millennia suddenly found their paths to the stars open again. Some celebrated, others panicked. but all understood that the galaxy would never be the same. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving multiple distress calls. It looks like other species are starting to move beyond their barriers, too." Kane nodded, unsurprised. Humanity's breakthrough had been the pebble that started an avalanche. The question now was whether they could survive what they had unleashed. "Set course for the nearest star system," he ordered. It's time humanity introduced itself to the galaxy. Behind them, Watcher Prime Threnin felt the weight of 3,000 years of failure settling on his crystalline consciousness. The Covenant was broken, the galaxy was stirring to life, and the age of peace was ending. The humans had shattered more than just a barrier. They had shattered the very foundations of galactic civilization. The first alien city that humans ever saw was growing. Ambassador Quellion of the Tyreth watched through his dwelling's transparent walls as strange new structures sprouted among the floating biocities of Verdania. These weren't the living buildings. His people cultivated from modified coral organisms. These were harsh, angular constructions of metal and glass that the humans called prefabricated research stations. 6 months had passed since the human ship Explorer had entered Tyreth space, and Quellion's world was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. The humans claimed they came in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship. But their version of friendship seemed to involve taking over. "The translation matrix is complete," announced Dr. Susan Wright, the human xenolinguist who had been working with Tyreth scholars to establish communication protocols. Her voice came through the organic speakers that had been installed throughout the city, another human innovation that was becoming standard equipment. Quellion's skin shifted through patterns of resigned acceptance as he made his way to the meeting chamber. The Tyreth communicated primarily through color changes in their skin, a beautiful and subtle language that had taken the humans only 3 weeks to decode and replicate with artificial displays. The speed of human adaptation was terrifying. "Honored. Quellion," Dr. Wright greeted him, her artificial color display shifting to the patterns of respectful greeting. She had learned Tyreth customs, but her mechanical approach to their sacred communication felt wrong somehow. "We're ready to begin the Cultural Exchange Program." The Cultural Exchange Program was humanity's polite term for systematic exploitation. Human scientists studied every aspect of Tyreth biotechnology, while Tyreth scholars struggled to understand concepts like territorial expansion and resource extraction. The humans gave freely of their knowledge, but everything they shared seemed designed to make the Tyreth more dependent on human systems. "Your people adapt quickly to our ways," Quellion observed, his skin showing patterns of cautious curiosity. Dr. Wright smiled, a facial expression the Tyreth found disturbing in its simplicity. "We're explorers by nature. Learning new things is what we do best." What she didn't mention was that humans were also conquerors by nature. They might not arrive with weapons blazing, but they conquered just the same. Within 6 months, human medicine had eliminated 3 major Tyreth diseases. Human engineering had improved their biocities' efficiency by 40%. Human entertainment had become wildly popular among young Tyreth, who found traditional color poetry boring compared to human movies. But the real conquest was philosophical. Humans brought ideas that challenged everything the Tyreth believed about existence. Competition, individual achievement, progress through conflict. These concepts were as alien to the Tyreth as their biocities were to humans. Meanwhile, Admiral Kane's main fleet had not been idle. Using intelligence gathered from their new Tyreth allies, they had mapped local space and identified other species. Most were as peaceful as the Tyreth, but some were not. The core of an empire controlled 14 star systems in this region of the galaxy. Before the Covenant of Silence, they had been the dominant military power, their warrior culture spread across dozens of conquered worlds. 3,000 years of enforced peace had not changed their fundamental nature, only suppressed it. Emperor. Thrakus stood in the war room of his ancient capital city, studying star charts that had not been updated in millennia. His species were natural predators, tall and scaled with razor-sharp claws, and predatory instincts that had been dulled by centuries of peace, but never eliminated. "The barriers are failing across the galaxy," reported General Morvac, his scarred face showing the ritual markings of a warrior caste that had been ceremonial for 3,000 years. "Dozens of species are beginning to move beyond their home systems." "And these humans?" Thrakus asked, his voice carrying the growl of a predator scenting prey. "They broke through first. Our scouts report they have formed an alliance with the Tyreth and are expanding rapidly. They claim to seek peaceful contact, but they move like conquerors." Thrakus's claws extended unconsciously, an ancient reflex his people had never fully suppressed. Then they understand the true nature of existence. The galaxy belongs to the strong. We will reclaim what should have been ours. The Koravan military machine began to stir for the first time in 3 millennia. Ancient weapons were brought online. Mothballed ships were recommissioned. Warrior castes that had become ceremonial began training for real combat. But they were operating from obsolete knowledge, using tactics and strategies that had not been tested in actual warfare for thousands of years. Humans, on the other hand, had never stopped fighting. Captain Maria Santos of the UES Retribution was conducting a routine patrol of the border between human and Koravan space when her sensors detected massive fleet movements. 40 ships, each one larger than anything, in the human navy were moving toward Tyreth space in perfect formation. "Get me Admiral Kane," Santos ordered her communications officer. The message she sent would trigger humanity's first real test in galactic warfare. Kane received the intelligence report while visiting the Tyreth capital city. Around him, the floating biostructures pulsed with new human-designed lighting systems, a small symbol of how thoroughly human influence had spread through Tyreth society. 40 ships? Kane asked, reviewing the tactical data. "Heading directly for Verdania?" "Yes, sir," reported Commander Patricia Wells, his tactical officer. "The Koravan are moving in classical battle formation. It's obvious they intend to conquer or destroy the Tyreth homeworld." Kane looked out at the beautiful alien city around him, thinking of the gentle beings who had welcomed humanity with open arms. The Tyreth had no weapons, no military, no understanding of the violence that was approaching their world. They would be slaughtered without protection. "Signal the fleet," Kane ordered. "All ships are to converge on Verdania immediately. It looks like we're about to find out what 3,000 years of peace has done to the galaxy's warriors." Quellion felt his skin shift to patterns of deep fear as he processed the information Dr. Wright had just shared with him. War was coming to his peaceful world, a concept so alien that his language barely had words for it. "Your people will protect us?" he asked, his colors showing desperate hope. Dr. Wright's expression was grim as she watched human warships taking defensive positions around Verdania. "We'll try, but I won't lie to you, Ambassador. The Koravan have 40 ships and 3,000 years of warrior tradition. We have 12 ships and a lot of determination." "Is that enough?" Quellion asked. Dr. Wright smiled, and for the first time her expression seemed genuine rather than diplomatic. "You're about to find out why humans never stopped learning how to fight." The two fleets approached each other across the void, and the galaxy held its breath for its first taste of war in 3,000 years. Blood drifted through the zero gravity of the UES Thunder's bridge in perfect crimson spheres. Commander David Torres floated unconscious near his shattered command chair, his ship's hull breached in 3 places by Koravan plasma cannons. Around him, emergency lights cast eerie shadows as his crew fought to keep their vessel alive. The battle for Verdania had been raging for 6 hours, and the humans were losing. Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, reported Chief Engineer Lisa Park, over the dying ship's communication system. We've lost main power, backup power is failing, and life support has maybe 20 minutes left. Torres regained consciousness just in time to see another Koravan heavy cruiser bearing down on his position. The enemy ship was massive, 3 times the size of any human vessel, its dark hull covered in ceremonial spikes and weapon ports that glowed with lethal energy. All remaining crew to escape pods, Torres ordered weakly, blood streaming from a head wound. This ship is finished. But even as he spoke, he watched the UES Defiance sweep in from beneath the Koravan formation, its weapons blazing in a desperate attempt to draw enemy fire away from the crippled Thunder. Admiral Kane's flagship was taking tremendous damage, but it bought Torres's crew precious seconds to evacuate. The battle had started according to plan. Kane had studied the approaching Koravan fleet and developed what he thought was a winning strategy. The enemy ships were powerful but old-fashioned, designed for the formal warfare of 3,000 years ago. Human ships were smaller and faster, equipped with weapons and tactics that no galactic species had ever encountered. But the plan had fallen apart within the first hour of combat. Emperor Thrakus commanded his fleet from the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, his massive flagship bristling with weapons that had been cutting-edge technology when human civilization was still learning to make bronze tools. His species, the Koravan, were natural warriors, and even 3 millennia of peace had not dulled their instincts for battle. "The humans fight with courage," he admitted to General Morvac, watching the tactical display as human ships darted between his formation like angry insects. "But courage alone cannot overcome superior firepower. The Koravan advantage was overwhelming. Their ships had better armor, more powerful weapons, and energy shields that could absorb incredible amounts of damage. The human fleet's hit-and-run tactics had inflicted some casualties, but not enough to change the outcome of the battle. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "the human flagship is moving to engage us directly. Admiral Kane appears to be making a final assault on our position." Thrakus's predatory smile revealed rows of sharp teeth. "Bring us about. Let's finish this properly." The 2 flagships closed on each other like ancient knights charging toward single combat. But this was no honorable duel. It was a desperate gamble by a human commander who had run out of conventional options. Kane stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the massive Koravan ship grow larger on his main screen. His ship was battered, his crew was exhausted, and half his fleet was already destroyed or disabled. In any rational analysis, the battle was lost, but humans had never been entirely rational. "All power to forward weapons," Kane ordered calmly. "Engineering, I need everything you can give me." "Sir," replied his chief engineer, "if we channel all power to weapons, we'll have no shields, no maneuvering capability, and no escape plan." "Understood," Kane said simply. "Do it anyway." The Defiance transformed itself into a massive kinetic weapon, channeling every bit of available power into its forward momentum and weapons systems. It accelerated directly at the Koravan flagship like a missile, its entire hull becoming a guided projectile aimed at the heart of the enemy formation. "Impossible!" snarled General Morvac as he watched the human ship's suicidal charge. "No commander would sacrifice his flagship for such a minimal tactical advantage." But Thrakus understood. His warrior instincts recognized what Kane was attempting. Not a tactical maneuver, but a statement of intent. The human admiral was declaring that his species would rather die fighting than accept defeat. "All batteries, target the human flagship," Thrakus ordered. "Destroy them before they reach us." The Eternal Conquest's weapons opened fire, filling space with deadly energy beams and explosive projectiles. The Defiance flew directly into this storm of destruction, its hull plating vaporizing, its internal systems failing, its crew dying at their posts. But the ship kept coming. At the last possible moment, Kane's vessel fired every weapon it had directly into the Koravan flagship's command section. The concentrated firepower, delivered at point-blank range, overwhelmed even the ancient ship's powerful shields. The explosion that followed lit up space like a small star. When the light faded, both flagships were gone. The destruction of their respective commanders should have ended the battle, but it only intensified the fighting. The surviving Koravan, ships, enraged by their emperor's death, began targeting the helpless Tyrith cities floating in Verdania's upper atmosphere. The remaining human vessels, inspired by Cain's sacrifice, threw themselves at the enemy with reckless abandon. What followed was not a battle, but a mutual slaughter. Ships on both sides fought until their weapons ran out of ammunition, then rammed each other in desperate final attacks. The space around Verdania became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen corpses. But gradually, impossibly, the humans began to win. It wasn't superior technology or clever tactics that turned the tide. It was something far more fundamental, the human refusal to accept defeat. Every time a human ship was destroyed, its crew found some way to take an enemy vessel with them. Every time the Koravan thought they had won, another human ship would appear from an impossible angle and continue the fight. Commander Patricia Wells, now in command of the surviving human forces, watched from the bridge of the UES Retribution. As the last Koravan heavy cruiser finally succumbed to damage and began to drift powerless through space. "Status report," she requested wearily. 8 Koravan ships destroyed, 6 disabled, the rest have retreated, reported her tactical officer. On our side, we have 3 ships still capable of combat operations, plus 4 vessels that might be repairable. Wells closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the victory and its cost. They had won, but barely. And this was just the beginning. "Ma'am," interrupted her communications officer. "We're receiving distress calls from 17 different systems. The Koravan weren't the only ones who started expanding when the barriers fell. There are wars breaking out across the galaxy." Wells opened her eyes and looked out at the debris field that had once been 2 proud fleets. Admiral Cain was dead, along with hundreds of other brave humans who had died to prove that humanity belonged among the stars. But their sacrifice had accomplished something important. It had announced to the galaxy that humans would fight for what they believed in, no matter the odds. "Send a message to Earth Command," Wells ordered. "Tell them to accelerate the shipbuilding program. We're going to need a much larger fleet." On the surface of Verdania below, Ambassador Quellion watched the human ships limp away from the battlefield. His skin shifted through patterns of gratitude and sorrow as he composed his report to the Tyrith Council of Colors. The humans had saved his people, but at a terrible cost. More importantly, they had proven that the age of peace was truly over. War had returned to the galaxy, and at its center stood humanity, the species that had opened the floodgates and now had to deal with the consequences. The stars, which had waited in silence for so long, now echoed with the sounds of battle across 100 worlds. The ancient ruins on Kepler 438b told a story that made Fleet Admiral Patricia Wells uncomfortable. 5 years after humanity's first victory at Verdania, archaeological teams had discovered the remains of at least 3 previous galactic civilizations, each one destroyed in wars that had sterilized entire star systems. Dr. Rachel Foster knelt beside a massive crater that had once been a city, her instruments detecting radiation signatures that were millions of years old. Around her, the survey team worked in the eerie silence of a dead world, cataloging the remains of a species that had learned too late the cost of galactic warfare. "This is the 4th world we've found like this," Foster reported to Wells over the communication link. "Same pattern every time. Evidence of advanced civilization, then sudden destruction, then nothing but ruins and radiation." Wells reviewed the archaeological reports from her flagship, the UES Prometheus, humanity's first true battleship built after the Koravan War. Around her, the war room displayed tactical information about the current state of galactic conflicts. 17 major wars, 43 border disputes, and dozens of smaller conflicts that flared up daily across known space. Humanity had carved out an empire of 37 systems in 5 years of constant warfare, but the cost had been enormous. Earth's shipyards worked around the clock, its military academies graduated new officers every month, and its colonies existed in a state of permanent alert. "Admiral," interrupted Captain Michael Rivera, her tactical officer, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Core. It's not from any known species." The message that followed was unlike anything humanity had encountered. It came not as radio waves or quantum signals, but as a direct impression on the minds of everyone in the war room. The voice was older than recorded history, tired beyond measure, and infinitely sad. "Children of the younger races," it began, "we are the Eternal Watch, last remnants of the first civilization. We have slept through 3 cycles of galactic rise and fall, hoping that wisdom might finally prevail. But we see that hope was false. The spiral dance of war and destruction begins again." Wells found her voice despite the overwhelming presence in her mind. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" The response carried gentle mockery. "We are what you will become, if you survive. We are the survivors of the last great burning, when the galaxy consumed itself in wars that lasted for 10,000 years. We tried to guide the younger races toward peace, but they always choose the same path." The communication paused, and Wells felt something like curiosity from the ancient presence. "Yet you are different, children of Earth. Your species has known. War throughout its existence has learned to rebuild from ashes, to find strength in diversity. Perhaps this time will be different." Over the following months, the Eternal Watch shared fragments of galactic history with humanity. The pattern was always the same. Species would develop space travel, expand rapidly, encounter other civilizations, and begin competing for resources and territory. The conflicts would escalate until entire regions of space became uninhabitable, forcing survivors to retreat to hidden sanctuaries until the galaxy could heal. "The Covenant of Silence was our latest attempt to break the cycle," explained the ancient voice during one of their regular communications. "We hoped that by preventing expansion we could prevent the wars that always follow. But stagnation is just another form of death." Wells studied the historical data from her command center, trying to understand the implications. "So you're saying galactic civilization is doomed to repeat this cycle forever?" "That was our belief," the Eternal Watch replied, "until we observed your species more closely. You fight constantly, yet you also cooperate when necessary. You conquer, yet you also build. You destroy, yet you also create. Perhaps you have learned something we missed." The real test of humanity's difference came when the Nexian hegemony revealed their secret project. This ancient species had spent the 5 years since the barrier's collapse building planet-killer weapons designed to end conflicts through overwhelming terror. Their message to the galaxy was simple: submit or be destroyed. When the first Nexian dreadnought appeared in human space, its massive hull bristling with weapons capable of cracking worlds, Wells faced the defining moment of humanity's stellar existence. The traditional response would be to build bigger weapons, to escalate the arms race until someone destroyed everything. Instead, Wells did something unprecedented in galactic history. She surrendered. "This is Fleet Admiral Wells of the Human Commonwealth," she broadcast on all frequencies as her entire fleet powered down their weapons. "We surrender unconditionally to the Nexian hegemony." The response from her own officers was immediate and shocked. "Ma'am," protested Captain Rivera, "we can't just give up without a fight." "We're not giving up," Wells replied calmly. "We're changing the rules." The Nexian commander, Admiral Vorth, was equally confused by humanity's response. His species had prepared for resistance, for a desperate battle that would demonstrate their new weapons' power. He had not prepared for unconditional surrender. "You yield your empire to us?" Vorth asked through the communication link, his translator struggling with concepts his species rarely encountered. Not exactly, Wells explained. We're offering you something better than conquest. We're offering you partnership. What followed was 6 months of the strangest negotiations in galactic history. Instead of fighting the Nexian hegemony, humanity offered to share their territory, their resources, and their knowledge. In exchange, they asked only for the right to continue existing and exploring. The Nexian, prepared for war but not for cooperation, found themselves drawn into discussions about trade agreements, joint research projects, and mutual defense pacts. Their planet-killer weapons, designed to inspire terror, became bargaining chips in complex diplomatic exchanges. Other species, watching humanity's unprecedented response to superior force, began to reconsider their own approaches to conflict. The Tyreth offered to mediate disputes using their gift for empathic communication. The remnants of the Koravan Empire, still bitter from their defeat at Verdania, grudgingly agreed to ceasefire negotiations when they realized that humanity was offering them trade routes instead of revenge. Even the mysterious Void cult, fanatics who had emerged from the galactic core preaching destruction as a form of enlightenment, found their message falling on deaf ears as species after species chose cooperation over conflict. "You are rewriting the rules of galactic civilization," the Eternal Watch observed during one of their communications with Wells. "In 4 cycles, no species has ever chosen to surrender as a path to victory. Your kind thinks in ways we did not anticipate." Wells smiled as she reviewed the latest reports from across human space. Trade was flourishing. Joint research projects were producing breakthrough technologies, and for the first time in 5 years, no human ships were engaged in active combat operations. "We learned something important during our history on Earth," she explained to the ancient presence. "Sometimes the best way to win a fight is not to fight at all. Sometimes the best way to conquer is to make your enemies want to join you." The transformation wasn't instant, and it wasn't universal. There were still wars raging in distant corners of the galaxy, still species that chose violence over cooperation. But slowly, carefully, humanity began to build something that had never existed in galactic history. A confederation based on mutual benefit rather than conquest. The breakthrough came when the Eternal Watch themselves emerged from their hidden sanctuary. Their ships were beyond ancient. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything the younger races possessed. But they came not as conquerors or judges. They came as partners. "We have waited through 4 cycles for a species wise. Enough to break the pattern," their leader explained to the assembled representatives of a dozen different civilizations. "We believe that time has finally come." Fleet Admiral Wells stood before the gathered aliens in the great conference hall of New Geneva Station, humanity's first diplomatic center. Around her were beings of every conceivable shape and form: crystalline Drakmari, scaled Koravan, color-shifting Tyreth, and dozens of others. 5 years ago, most of these species had been trying to kill each other. Now they were arguing about trade regulations and research protocols. "The galaxy is big enough for all of us," Wells said, addressing the assembly in words that had become humanity's unofficial motto. "We just had to learn how to share it." The Eternal Watch representative, a being so old that its original form was impossible to determine, pulsed with what might have been approval. "The cycle is broken. For the first time in galactic history, expansion has led not to war, but to growth. Not to destruction, but to creation." Not everyone was happy with the new order. There were species that preferred the certainty of conflict to the complexity of cooperation. There were regions of space where the old ways of conquest and domination still held sway. But for the first time in millions of years, there was an alternative. Dr. Foster transmitted her final report from the dead world of Kepler 438b as the archaeological survey concluded. "The ruins here tell the story of a species that chose destruction over compromise," she noted. "But that story doesn't have to be repeated. We've proven that there's another way." As her survey ship lifted off from the dead world, Foster looked back at the ancient craters and radiation-scarred landscape. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were probably species making the same mistakes that had destroyed this world. But there were also species learning to make different choices, species choosing cooperation over conquest, species building instead of destroying. The stars no longer waited in silence. They hummed with the sounds of commerce, diplomacy, exploration, and yes, occasional conflict. But for the first time in 4 galactic cycles, that conflict served a purpose beyond mere destruction. Humanity had shattered the void not to conquer it, but to fill it with possibility. They had broken the ancient pattern of rise and fall, war and destruction, silence and death. In its place, they had built something new, a galaxy where different species could coexist, compete, and cooperate without destroying each other in the process. The greatest human adventure was just beginning, and this time, they wouldn't be making the journey alone.